You've tuned in to The Self Leader, a Peoplepreneur podcast. I'm Anks, founder, host, and self-leadership coach. Get ready to forge your path forward. What awaits is an extraordinary existence, all of which is possible through your personal leadership. What if you were the reason for the change? Imagine the legacy you leave behind. The world needs you more than ever. There's a peoplepreneur in you. And so it's time to take the lead. Your self-leadership begins right now. Hey, self-leaders, Anks here, your self-leadership coach. I appreciate you and your time to spend here with us on this fourth episode. And what are we talking about today? Well, we're talking about authenticity. Now, I know in your self-leadership journey, at some point, whether it's now, whether it's before, whether you're yet to embrace it, this word, I like to call it the buzzword, this buzzword of authenticity, will for sure tread in front of you at some point. And perhaps that might be through, let's say, you building your own personal identity, your personal brand. Perhaps it's at work. Perhaps it's through relationships. Perhaps there's an insecurity there that we need to address. Now, whatever it is, wherever it's showing up in your life, we need to address it. And we're going to unpack this a little bit together to give you a perspective, the needed adoption about truly what this authenticity word is and how we ought to be adopting it into our lives. Now, this word was a fairly new word when I was dibbly-dabbling in personal brand work, not just for myself, but for others. And one of the hurdles that I ran into was, as much as we were curating a version of us that we wanted to amplify, it didn't feel like it was the right amplification. And a lot of the times the people that I was speaking to or helping, even as much as our digital persona looked amazing, it looked great, I felt even within particular clients that I used to have, even they too weren't connecting to the real dots. Now, that led me down a different path, and I'm the kind of person that really questions things because I need to have a sense of clarity before I can easily just come to adopt it. And for me to bring this to you means that there's something important I really want to share here. Now, I spent a lot of time trying to adopt this word, trying to quote unquote live up to authenticity rather than being myself. And even being myself it just sounds so cliche. And I wanted to kind of just go into this. More specifically, what problem authenticity has is what I call the paradox, this authenticity paradox that is keeping you from emerging as your real self. Now, listen, I cannot be free to be me in a space that isn't reflective of it. And there's one thing I can be sure of is that neither can you. If you're like me and you're someone who values the sense of self-freedom and the choice to experience life in your truest form, then authenticity is yet another word that we need to begin to dismantle. Because the fact that there is talk about authenticity, and even this podcast, unfortunately, means that there is a problem. The fact that we have to talk about it is a problem. Now, the word has been overused so much that it's part of our language. We talk about it, we see it. It's an ingredient in our process, our personal development. And we use it in business. We use it in relationships. It's now become this filter that we look through. Now, those people that are going to find it more challenging to sort of appreciate and understand are those that perhaps aren't ready to embrace their own realizations. And that's one of the things that you truly need when it comes to authenticity. Otherwise, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to spend decades of your life chasing something, chasing a term, chasing a perception. You're going to be wasting a lot of time being and doing something that you never intended. And that speaks to this idea that we need to stop living by somebody's standards, that perception I was talking about, a projection of others, perhaps a shadow of society. And instead, we need to start taking ownership. And this episode will bring that needed perspective. If you're listening, it's no coincidence. You're meant to hear this. So lean in, listen closely, and get ready. It's time to lead your way. Okay, so I spoke about a paradox. What is this paradox? Well, to simply put it to you, the paradox is our adoption of this term authenticity and how it contradicts our behavior of it. And what I mean by that is you'll notice that through conversation, the world basically praises authenticity, yet we're judging others based on our own subjective criteria of what we believe is authentic. Now, we expect people to be real, yet we measure them against external standards. And then often what we're doing is we're dismantling and labeling them when they don't fit into our expectations. And now it's this contradiction is what makes authenticity very problematic. And you're adopting it. I did adopt it. People are adopting it. But the thing is, it's not a universal truth, right? It's a subjective, socially conditioned standard. And that varies from person to person. Think about this. Let's say, hypothetically, I am your personal branding coach. And I said to you, you need to be more authentic. Out of reflection, do you know what criteria you need to be for the authenticity that I have now projected upon you? Perhaps not. Perhaps you do. Now, what if I was your business coach and I said, hey, we need to make more authentic connections? Now, reflectively, do you know what type of connections that is? What if I said we should work with people that authentically want to make a real difference? Now, do you know what criteria that authenticity is? See, the funny thing is, we are projecting a reference point, a criteria that we have defined it to be. Now, it's not as simple as just saying we all define things differently. The truth is we have a certain criteria that makes up what the word means, how we've defined it. Now, it could mean honesty to someone. It could mean genuinity to another. It could mean trustworthiness to somebody else. It could even mean, hey, listen, this person's telling the truth. Now, when I say authentic, I have a set criteria. When you say authentic, then you have a set criteria. Now, if we're both saying authentic to each other, then we become mind readers. It's a guessing game. Because who knows what we're talking about? We come to an assumption. We handshake on an assumption. Oh, yes, authenticity. But in truth, we both have very different definitions. Now, what if I said, hey, you need to be authentic? Then it's my criteria that I need you to adhere to. And this is all too familiar in today's world of personal identity, personal brand. individuality. Perhaps in business, when you're trying to find people to connect with, people to talk to, there is a big implication here. And that implication is when we use the word authenticity, when we're thinking about it, we're basically implying that others aren't. The question I have for you then to think about is, will anybody ever be authentic based on our criteria? Because you can ask 100 people about authenticity, and although we might shake hands on assumptions of what it means, down to the detail and how we've individually defined it will never match. Because then what's going to happen is we're just going to live unconsciously chasing a standard that somebody else has. Initially, when I was planning and making this episode, I was thinking about one particular movie that kept coming to my mind as a representation of really what I mean and what I'm trying to instill in you. And the movie was The Matrix. If you've seen it, you'd appreciate what I'm about to go into. And I want to show you this scene, particularly the training scene with Morpheus and Neo. And so what we're going to do is we're going to just dive into that training scene, listen to some of the dialogue, and begin to start reframing what it means and how it relates to authenticity. If you want to catch the scene, then these days it doesn't take anyone that long to find it. Just jump on YouTube, type in Matrix training scene, and you'll be right there. It's a 4-minute video. Go and take a look. But when you're ready, we're going to just jump right in.
This is a sparring program, similar to the programmed reality of the Matrix.
It has the same basic rules like gravity. What you must learn is that these rules are no different than the rules of a computer system. Some of them can be bent. Others can be broken. Understand? Then hit me, if you can.
So let me go into this and let me explain how this is reflective of our reality. What he's essentially just said there, if we were to reframe it, rephrase it, he's basically saying this is a framework, much like the program realities we navigate in life. It follows a certain principles, rules we've been conditioned to accept. But here's what you need to understand. These rules aren't fixed. Many can be reshaped, and some even can be broken. And he says, ready? Then stop holding back and show me who you truly are. See, at this point, I want you to understand Neo is us. It's you. It's me. Trying to show and trying to learn into the lesson that Morpheus is teaching us here about being authentic. And so we start with all our kicks and blows, the stuff we've learned, through the Matrix. And it gets to a point where, if you can remember that because Neo's learned this new skill, he starts showing off. And in that, he does a gesture where he flicks his nose because he's suggesting that he's really confident in his abilities. Predictably, the world knows that. And so Morpheus awaits and grabs a kick, swings him around and drops him on the floor. Now, this is synonymous to how we become very predictable in our sense of trying to be significant. And really, that scene basically shows how it goes against us and we're dropped on the floor.
Good. Adaptation, improvisation. But your weakness is not your technique.
What is he saying here? He's saying, good, you're adapting, you're improvising. But your weakness is trying too hard to own into yourself rather than simply being it. So we get up, we try again, we try different tactics to represent ourselves. We want to prove something. See, often at this time, people, they haven't the slightest concern whether what you're representing is true or false. There is a perception, there is a judgment there that is placed upon you, that's projected upon us, and we aren't even sure what that is. See, we're at a scene in the clip where Morpheus places his leg behind Neo, forces him back and trips him over. That's like us being exposed by our insecurities, and we fall for that. And as Morpheus throws him on one side and jumps and glides in the air to land a hard knee, we move and get back up. It's very similar to the world throwing what we're putting out there back at us. And eventually we try a few more things, and then we're hit back 2 meters, landing on the floor again. That's what just happened to Neo. Now we're up, we're triggered. The emotions are high at this point for Neo. And we're eager to be and show more of who we are. Morpheus has just flung him over because we're trying a different few tricks. Neo here, if you can remember, runs towards the beam and he creates this visually appealing backflip off the beam. And we're thinking we're just going to land and thinking we would show who we are. And then Morpheus kicks Neo into the beam. Again, we failed to live up to the world around us.
How did I beat you?
So Morpheus says, well, tell me, why am I not convinced by your authenticity?
You're too fast. Do you believe that my being stronger or faster has anything to do with my muscles in this place?
Interestingly here, Morpheus is saying, do you think my ability to see your authenticity has anything to do with the surface level traits? And do you even realize what you're projecting right now?
You think that's air you're breathing now?
The translation here is, do you really believe what you're relying on is genuine?
Again.
You see, at this point, Neo stops trying to overcome Morpheus, trying to overcome the projections. He begins to understand being something other than himself isn't going to work.
Jesus Christ, he's fast. Take a look at his neurokinetics. They're way above normal.
See, when we stop trying to be something other than what we are, even people will begin to notice. When you begin to believe in you, leaning into yourself, you begin to experience reality in a very different way.
What are you waiting for? You're faster than this. Don't think you are. Know you are.
Our translation will be, what's holding you back? You're capable of so much more. They may not or may be able to see it, but you should. See, at this point, Neo starts to begin to realize and changes his stance. And like you and me, we start shifting our perspective and we're going to try again.
Come on, stop trying to hit me and hit me.
He's saying, come on, stop trying to prove it and just be it. When you come to realize that we never have to try, that is when we will surpass our own definition of being. And Neo at this point begins to believe and ever so slightly becomes faster than Morpheus. And then there you go, in one swoop, he did it. You're just you.
I know what you're trying to do.
And there you go, Morpheus profoundly ends the scene in what we all need to understand.
I'm trying to free your mind, Neo. But I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it.
So there you go. Hopefully that was a little bit entertaining for you. But the funny thing about this is, often in movies like this, when we're watching from a framing where we're trying to enjoy something through entertainment, we can sometimes miss subtle cues, subtle dialogues that mean more to it than meets the eye. And for me, this training scene was just one of those moments. So I wanted to share that with you. But let's go into why we're using authenticity. Well, how do we justify it anyway? And really, what's some of the assumptions that we can surface and question? First of all, it's a no-brainer why social media acts the way it does, how we adopt it, is because it provides a certain sense of validation. It's become this widely accepted word, right? We celebrate anyone who is authentic, again, a certain criteria. But today it's become synonymous to how real someone is. How real am I? How real are you? And we're often questioning and thinking about how true to oneself we are. Often we could be wearing it like a badge of honor because it speaks to our integrity. And it speaks to this trait that is so valued today in society. Friends, if it's validation, a need for social validation, and knowing this fact is not really a public affair. We don't walk around saying, hey, listen, I need validation. You're never going to find anyone like that. Validation, what I'm talking about, is more a private affair, and you really need to have a certain inner reflection, to be able to determine that this is one of the things that is hindering you. And if there is some validation, then authenticity, especially from a social point, is not going to do the inner work that you need to. So that is something where you would need to feel, not gain it from an outside perspective. Because why is that? Well, what does society know about your truth? Perhaps very little. What does society know about you living true to oneself? What is oneself? How do they know what oneself is for you? How does anyone? How do I? Because what's going to happen then is we're playing this table tennis game, and we're always going to be second guessing ourselves if we can easily just adopt authenticity from what society tells it to be. That is going to increase your self-doubt. And that is one thing that we need to avoid. Secondly, the need for connection. I mean, I've seen this firsthand through conversations, and people talk so passively that they're trying to build authentic relationships. Perhaps they want authentic experiences. I always question whether they're looking or they seek. Perhaps they think that there is a promise of depth when you frame it in such a way. They think that there's more trust in it, or it means more by saying, oh, we want authentic relationship, authentic connections. In actual fact, I believe it's just shorthand for saying, is it worthy of my time and energy? Can I emotionally invest in this person? Which is, I believe, a completely incorrect way. But what's some of the things that we can surface? Listen, if that is the pursuit, if you are finding yourself, or you hear people say, listen, I want to create and connect with authentic connections, then isn't it by implication you're saying you deem people as inauthentic? Well, how can we start a footing, a relationship? How can we build trust in humanity, in people, when you start off on the foot of inauthenticity? Because how did we jump to that assumption? It becomes a bias, right? So we have an expectation there, something that I spoke about before. Remember, nobody can live up to that. If you already are actively saying, I'm looking for authentic connections, then how can anybody live up to that criteria without you specifically stating so? Often, that is a shield. It's a mask. A mask for what? It's a framing, because we're falling back on benefit. What is it in for me? And having that sense of judgment is actually holding you back for building authentic connections. So we need to really drop that. Number 3, we have the need today, especially with AI, to overcome artificiality. Now, it's no surprise today we are dominated by social media. This is a very hyper-curated world. And authenticity in this phase could be more of a counterbalance. So we're using it as a counterbalance to artificiality, because it symbolizes rawness, right? Vulnerability. We feel real. And so in that antidote of superficiality, who wants to portray fakeness or insincerity? Nobody. It seems odd to me that we would rely on artificial intelligence to make us seem more real. Because the problem there is progressively getting harder. Because if we haven't really truly understood authenticity first, then with AI now in the mix, it gets even more difficult. What is real or fake? And it's not about seeing real or fake. It's the fact, what I'm talking about is our sensitivity to it is questionable. Because if we failed to see authenticity before, then now it's going to be even more of a struggle to see beyond AI. And a lot of people are using AI to make themselves seem more real. It's just a call to reinforce their sense of self-esteem, right? And then probably the last one, I mean, there could be loads more. I'm just giving you the top few things. And the fourth one is the need for self-expression. Because we live in this world of overemphasis of individuality, it gives birth to stuff like personal brands and, people selling you the idea that you need to curate a personal brand, because the culture wants you to think of it from a perspective of advantage. What is that competitive advantage? Now, we're moving away from personal identity and personal brand here, because now there's a framing in between it. There's a benefit attached to it. If you think about, in terms of self-expression, if you think about who I believe to be some of the top personal brands, the likes of Bill Gates, Mel Robbins, Scott Harrison is one of them. They are the people that actually don't talk about it. They are unapologetically themselves, because their weight isn't based on curated identity, a digital platform. Their weight of who they are is based on their craft and their work. Their identity complements their intentions, not the other way around. Often what you're going to find in self-expression, especially in the business world, and when you're trying to build a perception of who you are, we end up going completely out of the phase of building personal brand, and we become more perceptive brands. Now, the problem with that is, if you're building a true personal brand, your identity, if you're amplifying the right thing, then you don't need to show a certain perception, because by its very nature, if you truly tapped into who you truly are, as authentic as you really are, then by its very nature, it should work for you. There is no need to have an expectation. And when there is, then we begin to start losing sight of the real work. And I spent way too long in this arena questioning, where do I stand? And, questioning this paradox. I'm projecting one thing, but something on the inside of me is contradicting. And then we can get all philosophical and get all Shakespearean, right? And we can say, to be real or not to be real, that is the question. Then I question, how real do I need to be? Because what happens when the real didn't work? That doesn't mean real doesn't work. Because then we start getting real, like, we start talking about vulnerability and throw vulnerability out there. But then that's a mental constraint that's really building up in our minds, and it's harming us more than it is serving us. And I am one of those people that I spent way too long trying to build something to an expectation, to a certain standard, to a term, to authenticity, than I have done on the work that I need to do. So, for example, this podcast, The Self-Leader, Peoplepreneur, could it have been created a little earlier? Sure. If I was tapping into truly who I need to be. The questioning on that was incorrect, but more so because I was adopting and embracing an ideal of what authenticity is, and how I need to, as in my time when I was trying to build personal brands, what expectation I need to build in order for you to look the part on a digital platform. So this begs the question, and I want to really show you the other side of this authenticity. When people adopt authenticity, yet they don't actually adopt it, what is happening? And I call this the ugly version of authenticity. And in fact, what it is just a distortion. It's a distortion of the truth. It's those that truly don't know who they are, but they live up to an expectation, authenticity, the word. They're showcasing it, they're using it as an excuse to be real. Remember, authenticity isn't an explicit thing. It's actually an implicit thing. So anytime we find ourselves, or you hear anyone talking about it or overly confident in it, or especially this ugly version of authenticity when people are using it as a shield, then in actual fact, there is no real depth to understanding of what it really is, because authenticity is just is. We would have accepted that. We accept people for who they show themselves to be. We are who we are, rather than saying, well, listen, I'm looking for authenticity. I'm being authentic. I need authentic. We should be authentic. We need to portray authentic. This is a very explicit version of authenticity, which has no substance. It's just self-justification, and that is not self-leadership. What that is a performance. It's an outward-facing action, reaction to something that is not connected within. Now, the best way I can illustrate that for you is, let's take a look at our language. How does it manifest? How can we reflect on that? And so what I've kind of picked out, these are the things that I've heard before, and I want to just relay that back to you. Perhaps you can resonate, or you know someone of this type. But what they say is things like, I'm living my life the way I want. That is a translation for saying, I reject any accountability for my actions. Perhaps they're saying, if you don't like it, then tough. That translation is saying, I use being real as an excuse to disregard others. What if they're saying, I am who I am? That translation says, well, I refuse to grow or reflect on my behavior. And lastly, I think if someone says, well, I don't give a crap what others think, that is a translation that says, I actually do, but I reject feedback before it even affects me. Now, I don't know about you, but that's an alert in my head. You know, that alarm bell going, that's not authenticity. That's just insecurity on steroids. Because there's a lack of understanding there. We haven't really owned into anything. Because we're justifying. We're reactive. Authenticity is about being intentional. It's not being rigid or self-centered. It's adaptive. It's open. There's a sense of self-awareness. So what this becomes is this defense mechanism, this performance, this play on, let me showcase something. In actual fact, what it signals is this fear of being vulnerable. And that fear, if not taken care of and only masked by authenticity, is not going to go away. Knowing you are who you are being that which is true to you, without expectation, without trying to justify, without anyone saying that it's true, without that validation, that is the only time where you really overcome it and you actually are authentic. Now, a good way to test this idea of authenticity, because what generally happens is people advocate it today. You hear it everywhere. They believe it, they use it, it's in their language, they embrace it. Personal branders talk about it. You know, in business, we talk about it. In relationships, it's being used. It's all great until it challenges someone's comfort. You see, I can say something here on the podcast, and there might be people out there that don't like what they hear. Now, if they truly embrace authenticity, then am I still authentic even if they hear something that they don't like? Do they react differently? All of a sudden, do they go missing? Meaning they're not around anymore. Do they reject it because it didn't serve them? Now, if authenticity is only valid when it aligns with what we want to hear, then that's not authenticity. Because if authenticity is truly valued, then being challenged by a perspective should be welcomed, not dismissed. It should be open and willing. You'd be willing to listen and reflect on a perspective that has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with them and their being, their sense of self, their journey. we understand from a detached point of view, not an attached point of view. I want to share an experience that I had before this podcast. I was reaching out to some people, influencers, anyone who I believed could contribute in the name of self-leadership. Now, I'm not going to mention names, but we jumped on a call, had a goodish conversation, but being on the podcast, they declined because what was important to them was being seen in the right place where it's going to amplify their personal brand. Now, 2 days later, they created a social media post prescribing the very thing that contradicted their behavior. Now, the quote was quite long, but one of the key things inside the quote said something like, take less and give more. And me asking them to be on the podcast, the reverse actually happened. They did not give more. There was very much a priority on their perception over the substance. It was like promoting ideals that they were reluctant to embody in private. It reminded me of such a lack of congruency, because as much as they were advocating generosity, they were selectively engaging in opportunities that only benefited their own image, presenting themselves like a thought leader publicly and curating that authenticity rather than living it in all spaces. So as much as they were saying it to other people, they weren't doing it, because now that authenticity is contingent on a particular audience perception rather than that person living their deeper rooted self-truth. And if our sensitivity to what is authentic, can we see authentic, can we determine authenticity, then what we're going to find is no longer are we concerned about the fox among the sheep. That isn't a problem anymore. It's the fact that the sheep are now becoming more like the fox. And so where does that leave me and you? What should we do? Well, can we start off by saying, well, everyone is authentic? Can we start the right footing to give the benefit of the doubt that doesn't matter how and what perception somebody gives, that we can deem them as authentic in their own right? There's no need to question it anymore, because it has nothing to do with me or you. We don't need to judge anyone based on any criteria. Can we remove that expectation to show us proof that you are real? A really powerful quote that I can remember, it's by Maya Angelou. She's a renowned poet, an author, and a civil rights activist. One of the things that she says was, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. This is what Maya told Oprah when she shared that some of her experiences of people repeatedly disappointing her. And Maya's wisdom here is a reminder that people reveal their true nature early on through their words and actions or patterns and behavior. And instead of making excuses for them or hoping they'll change, we should trust what they show us from the very beginning. Now, friends, what can we actually do, me and you? How can we take a step back and be able to observe all of this happening from a vantage point that puts us back in control? Well, there's three things, and I'll go into them slightly, but what they are is accept, observe, and discernment. So first of all, accept. We need to drop any unnecessary judgment. You need to question less someone's authenticity or inauthenticity. Forget labeling anything like that, and just accept people for who they are, what they show you. It doesn't matter. It's got nothing to do with you, what others do and what others show. We need to practice our sense of self-control here. Number two, the observe. We need to start seeing congruency. We're not looking for authenticity. We're observing their actions, their behavior, and their words, because those things are the things that will reveal the truth in good time. Because we're not here to judge anyone. We're here to perceive, because that's where insight happens. Number three, and discernment. We need to have zero assumptions. Rather than trying to mold someone into our expectation of authenticity, build that insight over time. because that will give you the benefit of any doubt that you have. Self-leaders, as I draw this episode to a close, I just want to part with you that your power ultimately is going to shine through when you stop adopting this word authenticity. Because in a world obsessed with proving authenticity, the most authentic thing you can do is stop trying to be authentic. The purest you comes from you being you, regardless of any outcome, and especially not to anyone's criteria. That includes not even yours. You do not need to prove yourself. You do not need to defend who you are. And you certainly don't need to perform any type of realness. Just live in congruence. Claim what you do and only claim what you've done. Because the realest people don't focus on being authentic. They just simply are. Thanks for listening. You've tuned in to the Self-Leader Podcast. Follow us, rate and review our episodes, because together we can build a more connected and fulfilled world. Anks here. Until we meet again, self-lead or inevitably be misled.